What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to show you my 1983 BMW 320i. Now this car comes stock with 101 horsepower, and it was the first 3 Series ever made, but the last year they made this 3 Series. A lot of people get confused between this and the E30 because they do look really similar, but the difference between this and the E30 is that this front grille right here for the E30 is a lot more boxier, including the back end. Now the 320i is a coupe, which means there are only 2 doors. One on the drivers, one on the passengers, but it is a 5-seater. So it does have a back row for 3 people. That back row is pretty tiny though. When me and my friends used to go on drives in this, we barely fit. This is the first car I ever owned, and a little bit of a story on how I got to owning this car. So it used to be my dad's car, and this was his first car. He bought it in, I believe, 1987 for around $5,500. And he drove this car, he loved this car. And around 2004 or 2005 is when the last time this car was driven. What happened was there was an oil leak, and he wanted to take apart the car and basically restore it back to its original state. And so we put it in the garage and took a couple things apart. And he never really got around to putting it back together. Now, in 2005 or 2006, I was about 4 years old, and I love cars, and I love just seeing this car in the garage. It was a BMW. It was so cool. I've always been into cars, I guess, ever since I was young, and I've always wanted to get my license. And I still remember counting down the years from when I was like 5 or 6 until I got my license, and my dad promised me this car as my first car. So when the time came, I turned 16 and I got my license, but I didn't have a car. This car wasn't working. So what I did was I started working on this car every day, putting in the hours, fixing it up, making it look like new. And I remember it was a lot of hours. I did everything I know about cars is from this car. I learned where the transmission is, how to take apart an engine and put it back together, how to do suspension work. I did so much on this car, and there were so many issues. And after working so many hours on it, I remember so many hours, I finally got it to run, and I finally got it to drive. And I took my first drive in it, and I get back home, and there was a head gasket leak. And for those of you who don't know, head gasket leaks typically cost $1,000 to $2,000 because of labor. I mean, the actual head gasket is pretty cheap, but I was so bummed. I do all my repairs at home, so I didn't need to spend that much, but I was so bummed because it was such a big job. And me and my dad, he taught me how to do everything, and he's like, okay, let's get this head gasket leak fixed. And we put about a month into it. We took apart the entire engine, we labeled everything, had bags for all the screws and the bolts and nuts and everything, and it was time to put it back together. And we put it back together, we put everything together, and what I still remember, one of the things was the oil pan underneath the car. It just kept leaking. We had to replace that gasket like 3 times. But we put it back together, and it wasn't running. We forgot to do something. It was so frustrating. And 2 months into working on this car, or 2 months into like working on the head gasket problem, we finally found that we forgot to connect one of the wires, and that's why it wasn't starting. So it just goes to show you how such a simple thing on a car, just one thing broken or one thing not connected, can stop a car from running. Anyway, that's my story on how I got to driving this car. And I drove this car for about 2 years, and it wasn't the most reliable car since it is from 1983, and we still did not fix everything. There are still, odd end things here that we need to replace and fix. But yeah, I drove this car for about 2 years in school, and finally it eventually stopped being reliable, and I needed a new car, and that is when I got my my SI over there. But still, I love this car. This is my favorite car right now. just because of how many hours I put in and all the memories I've made in it. It's just cool to see something from 1983 and driving a car from going from 1983 to 2020 back there. It's so cool. Like one thing, for example, these bumpers right here, they're solid metal. So if it ever does get into a collision, instead of collapsing like a normal car, this would just go straight through. It's also the back bumper. It's solid metal, and just these taillights, everything, it has a more boxier look versus a 2020 car, where 2020 cars are more sleeker, but this is more of a boxier look, and I think that's what they were going for, because in 1983, in the 80s and the 90s, that was more of the look. Now, these tires or these wheels are not OEM. They are not the original wheels. We actually have the original wheels in the backyard, and I eventually want to put those on the car, but they are a lot smaller. So what I was thinking for the car was maybe drop this car a little bit and put the OEM wheels on, just make it look sick. And I'm just gonna keep this car OEM, I think. But still, these wheels these rims still look pretty good with the car. And it's just amazing to see how, this is the original paint. So the way it glistens in the sun right now, all the way from 1983 from being painted to now, is just beautiful. Also, another thing to note is everything on this car is mechanical. Now cars come with computers to tell them when to do fuel injection, when there's a problem or something. But this has a computer, but it's a very basic computer. Everything in this car is mechanical, which was just crazy to work on. Because if something broke, you know it's a piece, it's not the computer. And you couldn't really check errors. You would actually have to use like your senses, your sound, your smell, your eyesight, just looking and seeing. The 0 to 60 on this is about 10.1 seconds. And let me show you the interior. It's not a normal car. Now, it is not equipped with airbags. There are barely any safety features. I mean, there are seat belts, but it doesn't come with airbags. There's no power steering, and everything is manual. The AC doesn't even work in this car yet. I actually still have to fix that. But usually, you know, a car like this, you roll the windows down and you drive, and it's just so much fun. But without the power steering, turning the wheel is a pain. It is so hard to turn the wheel because there's no power steering, so it's manual. It's literally a rod connected to the axle, and it turns the tires, which is just, it was so hard to drive, but it is so fun to drive. Even though it's not that fast, it's fun to cruise in a car like this, and you get so many looks and people like, oh, cool car, man, this and that. Now, this has about 200,000 miles on it, and the fuel gauge actually doesn't work. This is the steering wheel right here, and I love how everything right here is just so driver oriented. If you look, it is pointed towards me. Now, the transmission right here, the shifter right here, is very loose, which we don't know yet, we're trying to fix, but it does still go into gear. And we installed a new radio, that way I have Bluetooth. Actually, my dad set up his own stereo system in here where he upgraded the 2 front speakers, and then we have 2 back speakers right there, JBLs, and then 2 JBL subwoofers in the trunk. So the sound is pretty good, and I do have Bluetooth, which is nice. And just everything, when we took this apart, we still haven't put this back together yet. It is still pretty loose. We need to put all the screws and everything in. But even just for like the headlights, you have to pull these. And just for I don't even have power windows. I actually have to manually roll up my windows. And to open this car, you might be wondering, I love doing this to people. When they hop in my car for the first time, I'm like, okay, it's time for you to, like, you know, get out. And they look for the door handle and they're like, where's the door handle? And I just wait for them to like try to figure it out. And sometimes, most of the time, they don't get it. But for the door handle right here, I think this is really cool. The door handle is actually in here, and it's a lever right here, and you have to pull it and open it. Something else that took us forever to fix, and actually still isn't fixed on the car, is the exhaust system. So a little bit of a story about the exhaust. If you can see, I don't have a muffler on the car. So I was driving one day with this car on the highway, and I heard a loud scraping noise, and I got to my destination. It was just off the off-ramp. So I get off the off-ramp, I get into the parking lot, and I look under the car, and the muffler was actually on the floor. And what happened was, somehow the hangers came loose that we built for it. The hangers came loose, the muffler fell, and it was torn. So what I ended up having to do is I cut off the exhaust, and this thing is essentially just straight pipe, so it is so loud. I'll actually give you a startup right now. I can't rev it though because it's way too loud and I don't want to disturb anyone. you can hear that, that is the exhaust rattling, and it is very, very loud. It doesn't smell too good either right now because it's just a cold startup. I haven't driven this car in a while actually because it's out of gas, but it actually pops. Let's turn that off real quick. It actually pops. The exhaust pops when it gets warm, which is just crazy. But I want to put a muffler on it. I mean, this is meant to be all original, you know, keeping it as original as possible. So, yeah. Now let's take a look under the hood. And something cool about this car is the way the hood opens. You see traditional hoods open through here, but the way this opens is you pull it forward, come back here. So it's kind of like a Corvette hood. So this is under the hood. This is the intake manifold. There's the engine right here. It is a 1.4 liter straight 4-cylinder. Here we have the radiator, and another thing that happened is once we started the car, this radiator currently is being held in by zip ties on both sides, but before that it was shaking like crazy. And it actually hit this fan, and this fan shattered, and this radiator shattered as well. So one of the first jobs I actually did on a car, or my first job ever on a car, my first big job or semi-big job, was I replaced this fan and the radiator. And the broken fan is still in my room to this day, and I hang it on my wall as in memory of my first ever job. But it's not that much of that cool of an engine bay. I do eventually want to clean it. And here is the fuse box. Now something interesting about the fuse box is you see this red wire running with this black wire. That is actually my underglow kit for this car. It's the first time I ever installed underglow, or my first actual mod on a car. I will put a few pictures up so you guys can see what it looks like, and I honestly think it looks pretty sick. Please leave this video a like if you appreciate this car, and hit that subscribe button. It would really help out the channel, and you get to see more of my content. And leave a comment down below what you think I should do with this car, and any mods you think I should do with my SI, or if you'd love to see something with both cars. I'll see you guys in the next one.